The morning sun streaked through the massive glass windows of Westfield Corporate Tower, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Carlos Mendez, the building's janitor for nearly 7 years now, moved his mop in slow, practiced circles. At 45, his back ached a little more each year, but he took pride in his work. The executives who passed by rarely noticed him, just another invisible person in a blue uniform keeping their world spotless. Carlos checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. He had about 15 minutes before the morning rush began. That's when the elevators would start pinging constantly, bringing waves of suits and briefcases and coffee cups that would inevitably spill. For now, though, the lobby was peaceful. As he wheeled his cleaning cart toward the east wing, Carlos noticed someone sitting alone in the atrium. This was unusual. Most employees didn't arrive until at least 7:30. Curious. He moved closer and recognized her immediately. It was Sophia Thornton, the daughter of Richard Thornton, CEO and founder of Thornton Industries, which occupied the top 5 floors of the building. Everyone knew who she was, though few had actually spoken to her. Not that speaking would have made much difference. The 19-year-old hadn't uttered a word in 3 years, not since the accident that took her mother's life and left Sophia physically unharmed but completely silent. Carlos had seen her around the building occasionally. Mr. Thornton sometimes brought her to work when her regular caretaker was unavailable. The young woman usually sat quietly in the same spot in the atrium, watching people come and go. Today she wore simple jeans and a light blue sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was the daughter of one of the richest men in the city. But there was something in her eyes, a sharp awareness that made Carlos think she missed very little of what happened around her. He nodded politely as their eyes met, then continued with his work. He didn't want to stare or make her uncomfortable. As he cleaned nearby, he noticed how she kept glancing at the grand piano that sat in the corner of the atrium. The instrument was mostly for show, played only during holiday parties or special events. Sophia's fingers tapped lightly against her knee, and Carlos recognized the motion immediately. He'd seen it thousands of times before. She was playing invisible keys matching some melody in her head. As a former music teacher, he knew a musician when he saw one. Before becoming a janitor, Carlos had taught piano and guitar at a community center. Music had been his life until bills piled up and his daughter got sick. Angela had needed specialized treatments and the medical costs had quickly drained their savings. After she passed away 5 years ago, Carlos had been too grief-stricken to return to teaching. The janitorial position had been meant as temporary, but somehow years had passed. He watched as Sophia stood up and slowly approached the piano. She didn't sit down or touch the keys. Instead, she just walked around it, her fingertips barely brushing the polished black surface. There was longing in that touch, and Carlos felt a pang in his chest recognizing it. "It's a beautiful instrument," he said before he could stop himself. Sophia startled slightly, as if she'd forgotten he was there. She didn't respond, of course, but she didn't walk away either. Carlos wiped his hands on his uniform pants. "Sorry to disturb you. I just noticed how you were looking at it. Do you play?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I thought so." Carlos smiled. "I used to teach piano years ago. I can always tell when someone has music in their hands." Sophia tilted her head slightly, studying him with new interest. She pointed at him, then mimicked playing. "Do I play?" "Yes, though not as much as I should these days." The corner of her mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. She looked back at the piano, then at the clock on the wall. 7:10 a.m. The building would be getting busy soon. Carlos understood. "Maybe another time," he said, and returned to his mop. Throughout the day, he caught glimpses of Sophia as he moved through his cleaning rounds. She spent most of the morning in her father's office on the 35th floor. But after lunch, she was back in the atrium, this time with a sketchbook. Carlos noticed she wasn't drawing. Instead, she appeared to be writing music. The way her pencil hovered between notes, the thoughtful pauses, the occasional silent hum as she worked out a phrase in her head. These were things he recognized from his teaching days. By late afternoon, Carlos was polishing the brass railings near the security desk when he overheard Linda from events talking frantically on the phone. "What do you mean he canceled? The gala is in 2 weeks. We can't find another pianist on such short notice." Not one of his caliber, anyway. She paused, listening to the person on the other end. Well, Mr. Thornton will be furious. This benefit is his pet project. The children's hospital wing is being named after his wife, for heaven's sake. Carlos tried not to eavesdrop, but it was difficult given how loudly Linda was speaking. The annual charity gala was a major event at Thornton Industries. Each year it raised millions for children with disabilities. This year's focus was a new rehabilitation center at the children's hospital. Fine. Call every music school and conservatory in the city. Someone must be available. Linda hung up and dropped her head into her hands. Carlos hesitated. The thought forming in his mind was ridiculous. He should mind his own business. He was just a janitor, after all. But the image of Sophia's fingers hovering over those piano keys kept returning to him. Before he could talk himself out of it, Carlos approached the events coordinator. "Excuse me, Ms. Linda. I couldn't help overhearing. There's a problem with the pianist for the gala?" Linda looked up, surprised that the janitor was addressing her. "Yes, but don't worry about it. We'll figure something out. I might know someone who could help," Carlos said, his heart beating faster. "I believe Miss Thornton plays piano." Linda's surprised expression transformed into disbelief. "Sophia Thornton? The CEO's daughter? The one who doesn't speak?" Carlos nodded. "Yes, I saw her this morning. She was writing music in the atrium." Linda's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "That's impossible. She hasn't performed in years, not since before her accident. And besides, Mr. Thornton would never allow it." "Allow what?" came a deep voice from behind them. Carlos turned to find Richard Thornton himself standing there, his imposing figure made more intimidating by the expensive tailored suit and the stern expression on his face. At 50, the CEO had a full head of salt and pepper hair and the confident stance of a man used to being obeyed. Linda scrambled to her feet. "Mr. Thornton!" "We were just discussing the gala. Unfortunately, our pianist has canceled and we're searching for a replacement." Thornton frowned. "That's unfortunate, but I'm sure you'll find someone suitable." "What does that have to do with what I would or wouldn't allow?" Linda shot Carlos a warning look, but he had already come too far to back down now. "Sir," Carlos said, standing straight despite his worn uniform, "I was suggesting that your daughter might be able to perform. I noticed she has musical training." Thornton's expression darkened. "And you are?" "Carlos Mendez, sir. I work maintenance." "Well, Mr. Mendez, I don't appreciate you discussing my daughter or making assumptions about her abilities." Thornton's voice was cold. "Sophia doesn't perform anymore. She hasn't touched a piano in 3 years. Carlos knew he should apologize and walk away, but something made him stand his ground. Maybe it was the memory of how Sophia had looked at that piano. Or maybe it was because he recognized in her the same silent grief he had carried after losing his own daughter. "With respect, sir, I saw her this morning. She was writing music. And the way she looked at the piano—" Carlos paused, searching for the right words. There was longing there. For a moment, Thornton's stern expression faltered. "She was writing music. You're certain?" "Yes, sir. Musical notation. In a notebook." Thornton fell silent, something unreadable crossing his face. "Mr. Thornton," Linda interjected nervously, "we don't want to cause any discomfort. We'll find another pianist." But Thornton wasn't listening to her anymore. He was studying Carlos with new interest. "You said you noticed she has training. Are you familiar with music yourself?" "I used to teach piano and guitar at the community center on Hudson Street," Carlos replied. "Before I started working here. A janitor who was a music teacher," Thornton said thoughtfully. "How did that happen?" Carlos swallowed hard. "Life takes unexpected turns sometimes, sir." Something in his tone must have registered with the CEO because his expression softened slightly. "Indeed it does, Mr. Mendez." He checked his watch. "My daughter is in my office now. I'm curious about this music she's supposedly writing. Would you mind coming upstairs with me?" Carlos looked down at his uniform, then at his cleaning cart. "Don't worry about that," Thornton said, following his gaze. "This is more important." As they walked toward the elevator together, the janitor and the CEO, Carlos could feel Linda's astonished stare following them. His heart pounded in his chest. What had he gotten himself into, and what would happen when they reached the 35th floor? The elevator ride to the 35th floor was the longest minute of Carlos's life. He stood awkwardly next to Richard Thornton, acutely aware of his worn uniform and the faint smell of cleaning products that clung to his hands. The CEO seemed lost in thought, staring at the climbing floor numbers without speaking. When the doors finally opened, Carlos stepped into a world that might as well have been on another planet from the basement maintenance office where he took his lunch breaks. Soft lighting illuminated artwork that probably cost more than what he earned in a year. The carpet was so plush he could feel it through the soles of his work boots. "This way," Thornton said, leading him down a wide hallway where assistants looked up in surprise as the janitor followed their boss. They reached a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sophia sat in a comfortable chair near the window, her notebook open on her lap. When she saw her father enter with Carlos, her eyebrows rose slightly. "Sophia," Thornton said gently, "this gentleman tells me you were writing music today. Is that true?" She hesitated, then slowly turned her notebook around. Carlos caught a glimpse of neatly written musical notation covering the page. It wasn't just simple melodies, the composition looked complex with intricate harmonies and time signature changes. "May I?" Carlos asked, gesturing to the notebook. After a moment's hesitation, Sophia nodded. Carlos took the notebook carefully and studied the composition. His eyes widened as he read through it. "This is beautiful," he said honestly. "Reminds me a little of Debussy, but with your own modern touch." He looked up at Sophia. "You're very talented." A faint blush colored her cheeks. She took back the notebook and wrote something on a blank page, then showed it to them. "I've been working on this piece for months," her note read. "No one was supposed to know." Thornton frowned. "Why would you keep this from me, Sophia? You know I would support anything that makes you happy." She wrote again, more slowly this time. "I wasn't ready. I'm still not ready." "Ready for what?" her father asked. "To let music back into her life," Carlos said quietly, understanding what Sophia couldn't put into words. Both Thorntons turned to look at him. "Sometimes when we lose someone, we also lose the things we shared with them. The pain gets all tangled up together." Thornton's expression shifted as he studied Carlos with new interest. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." Carlos nodded. "My daughter, Angela, she loved music too. After she passed, I couldn't teach anymore. Couldn't even listen to the songs she used to love." The room fell silent. Sophia was watching him intently, recognition in her eyes. She wrote something else and held it up for Carlos to read. "What changed?" her note asked. "Time," Carlos answered, and realizing that letting go of music wasn't honoring her memory, it was burying a part of her. "A part of me too," he smiled sadly. "I still don't teach, but I can listen now. Sometimes I even play." Thornton cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. "Mr. Mendez suggested you might be able to perform at the charity gala, Sophia." "Our pianist canceled." Sophia's eyes widened in alarm. She shook her head vigorously. "That's what I thought," Thornton said. "It was a misunderstanding." But Carlos wasn't ready to give up. "The gala is for the Children's Hospital, right? The new rehabilitation center?" Thornton nodded. "The Maria Thornton Memorial Wing, named after my late wife. Would your mother have wanted you to share your music?" Carlos asked Sophia directly. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote her response. "She's the one who taught me to play." "I didn't know that," Thornton said softly, looking surprised and a little hurt. "She never mentioned it," Sophia wrote again. "It was our secret, just between us." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Carlos felt like he was intruding on a private family moment. He took a step back toward the door. "I should get back to work. I'm sorry if I overstepped." "Wait," Thornton said. He turned to his daughter. "Sophia, would you at least consider playing at the gala? No pressure, just think about it. It might be a beautiful way to honor your mother." Sophia stared out the window for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook and handed it to her father. Thornton read it and looked up with surprise. "You want Mr. Mendez to help you prepare, why?" She took the notebook back and wrote more, showing it to both of them. "He understands. And he won't feel sorry for me." Carlos felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, concern, and something like fear. "Sir, I don't know if that would be appropriate. I'm just the janitor." "A janitor who used to be a music teacher," Thornton corrected him. He paced the office, clearly thinking through the implications. "How would this work? Sophia has classes during the day and you have your regular duties." Carlos hesitated. "I could stay after my shift some evenings." "If Ms. Thornton is willing to practice then." Sophia nodded eagerly. Thornton still looked uncertain. "I'd need to be present, of course." "Of course," Carlos agreed quickly. And if it doesn't work out or if Miss Thornton changes her mind, there's no harm done. Thornton checked his watch and sighed. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. We'll try one session, tonight at 7 and after your regular shift ends. We'll use the piano in the atrium. His tone made it clear this was both an order and a test. Yes, sir. Thank you, Carlos said, trying to hide his surprise that the CEO had agreed. As he turned to leave, Sophia caught his eye and gave him a small, grateful smile. It was the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. Back in the elevator, Carlos let out a long breath. What had he gotten himself into? He was a janitor who hadn't taught music in 5 years, now apparently coaching the mute daughter of a CEO for a high-profile charity event. It was absurd. Yet as the elevator descended, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose that went beyond clean floors and emptied trash cans. The rest of Carlos's shift passed in a blur. He found himself watching the clock, alternating between anticipation and anxiety about the evening session. By the time he finished his final tasks, it was nearly 6:45 p.m. He quickly changed his shirt in the maintenance locker room and splashed water on his face. When he arrived at the atrium, Sophia was already there, sitting on the piano bench. Her father stood nearby, checking emails on his phone. The building was mostly empty now, with only security and a few workaholics still around. Mr. Mendez. Thornton acknowledged him with a nod. I've arranged for you to have access to the building after hours for these sessions. Security has been informed. Thank you, sir, Carlos replied, surprised by this accommodation. Sophia looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Carlos approached the piano slowly, trying to project calm confidence he didn't entirely feel. Have you played it all since? He asked gently. She shook her head. That's okay, he said. The piano remembers even when we think we've forgotten. He sat down on the bench beside her, leaving plenty of space between them. Let's just start with something simple. A C major scale, perhaps? Sophia placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down. Carlos could see her fingers trembling. Take your time, he said. There's no rush. After what seemed like minutes but was probably only seconds, Sophia pressed the first key. The note rang clear through the atrium. Then another and another. Her scale was hesitant but technically perfect, muscle memory guiding her fingers. Beautiful, Carlos said when she finished. Now, how about a simple piece? Maybe for Elise? Most pianists know that one. Sophia nodded and began to play the familiar Beethoven piece. She started slowly, but as her confidence grew, her tempo steadied. By the time she reached the middle section, Carlos could see she was no beginner. Her technique was excellent despite years away from the instrument. When she finished, Carlos smiled. That was wonderful. You play beautifully. From across the room, Thornton spoke up. She used to play for hours every day. Competitions, recitals. She was headed for Juilliard before. His voice trailed off. Carlos looked at Sophia with new respect. A concert pianist in the making? She shrugged modestly, but her eyes had brightened. She took out her notebook and wrote quickly, What about the piece for the gala? Let's try your composition, Carlos suggested. The one in your notebook. Sophia hesitated, then shook her head. She wrote, Not ready to share that yet. I understand, Carlos said. What about something else? Something that means something to you and your mother? She thought for a moment, then placed her hands on the keys again. This time she played a haunting melody Carlos didn't recognize. It was melancholy and beautiful, with complex emotional shifts throughout. When she finished, Carlos sat in stunned silence. Even Thornton had put his phone away and was watching his daughter with an expression of mingled grief and pride. What was that? Carlos finally asked. Sophia wrote in her notebook, Mom's favorite. She wrote it. Carlos looked at Thornton in surprise. Your wife was a composer? She studied music in college, Thornton replied, his voice unusually soft. Before she went into business. I had forgotten about her compositions. Sophia wrote again. I want to play this at the gala. With changes. My own arrangement. Carlos nodded. That would be perfect. We have 2 weeks to prepare. If you're willing to work hard, Sophia's determined expression answered for her. Then that's what we'll do, Carlos said, feeling more confident now. We'll need to meet every evening. Is that possible? Thornton nodded. I'll make the arrangements. He checked his watch. It's getting late. We should head home, Sophia. As they prepared to leave, Sophia quickly wrote one more note and handed it to Carlos. "Thank you for seeing me."
Really seeing me?
Carlos felt a lump in his throat as he watched them walk toward the elevator. For the first time in years, he felt the familiar excitement of working with a talented student. But more than that, he recognized in Sophia the same journey he had taken, the slow, painful process of finding your way back to the things you love after loss has taken them away. As he gathered his things to leave, Carlos realized that in trying to help Sophia, he might finally be finding his own way back too. The next evening, Carlos arrived at the atrium 15 minutes early. He had spent most of his lunch break sketching out a practice schedule for Sophia. With only 2 weeks until the gala, they would need to make every minute count. He was surprised to find Sophia already there, sitting at the piano with her notebook open. She wasn't playing, just staring at the keys with an intense expression. When she noticed Carlos, she waved and wrote something quickly in her notebook. "I got here an hour ago," her note read. "Couldn't wait to start." Carlos smiled. "That's the kind of dedication we need." "Where's your father?" She pointed upward and wrote, "Important call. He'll be down soon." "Perfect. Let's warm up while we wait." Carlos placed his bag on a nearby chair and sat down on the bench beside her. "Let's start with some scales and arpeggios to loosen up your fingers." For the next 10 minutes, Sophia played through the exercises Carlos suggested. Her technique was rusty after 3 years away from the piano, but her natural talent was obvious. By the time Thornton arrived, looking tired after his long day, she was playing with more confidence. "Sorry I'm late," Thornton said, loosening his tie. "How's it going?" "Very well," Carlos replied. "Your daughter hasn't lost her touch." Thornton nodded, settling into a chair where he could watch them. Her mother would be pleased. Sophia's expression softened at the mention of her mother. She turned to her notebook and wrote, "Can we work on Mom's piece now?" "Of course," Carlos said. "Play it through once so I can hear it again." As Sophia played the haunting melody her mother had composed, Carlos watched her face. There was pain there, but something else too. A kind of peaceful connection. When she finished, her hands remained on the keys as if reluctant to break the spell the music had cast. "Beautiful," Carlos said softly. "Now, you mentioned wanting to arrange it yourself. Do you have ideas about what changes you want to make?" Sophia nodded eagerly and showed him several pages in her notebook where she had written variations on her mother's theme. Carlos studied them with growing admiration. The girl wasn't just a talented pianist, she had a composer's mind too. "These are excellent," he said honestly. "Especially this middle section. It adds depth without losing the original feeling." For the next hour, they worked through Sophia's arrangement, discussing it through a combination of playing, writing notes, and the kind of unspoken understanding that sometimes develops between musicians. Carlos made occasional suggestions, but he was careful to let Sophia make the final decisions. It was her tribute to her mother, after all. Thornton watched silently, his expression unreadable. When they took a short break, he approached the piano. "It sounds different," he said, "but I can still hear Maria in it." Sophia looked up at her father, a question in her eyes. "Yes," he said, answering her unspoken thought. "She would love what you're doing with it." The moment was interrupted by the night security guard, Pete, walking through on his rounds. He paused, listening to the music. "Don't mind me," he said. "Just doing my checks." "That sounds real nice, though." "Thank you," Carlos replied. "We're preparing for the charity gala." Pete's eyebrows shot up as he looked at Sophia. "You're playing at the gala, Miss Thornton." "That's wonderful." Sophia gave him a small smile and nodded. "Well, I'll look forward to hearing more as I make my rounds," Pete said with a friendly wave. After he left, Carlos noticed that Sophia seemed more tense. She wrote in her notebook, "People will be watching me. Hundreds of people." "Yes," Carlos acknowledged. "Does that scare you?" She nodded, then wrote, "What if I freeze? What if I can't do it?" "That's a normal fear," Carlos assured her. "Even professional musicians get stage fright." "Sophia used to perform regularly," Thornton added. "Competitions, recitals. She never seemed nervous before." Sophia wrote again, "That was before. Everything is different now." Carlos understood. Before the accident, before losing her mother, before her voice went silent, that was a different lifetime. He thought for a moment, then asked, "Why do you want to play at the gala?" "You don't have to do this." She took her time writing her answer. "For Mom." For the kids at the hospital? For me? Then hold on to those reasons when you get scared, Carlos said. And remember, you won't be alone up there. We'll be with you in spirit, and you'll have your mother's music to guide you. Sophia nodded, looking slightly reassured. They returned to work, focusing on the most challenging sections of the piece. By the end of the 2-hour session, they had mapped out most of the arrangement. That's enough for tonight, Carlos said, noticing Sophia's fatigue. You did very well. Tomorrow we'll start memorizing sections. As they packed up, Thornton approached Carlos. A word in private, Mr. Mendez? Carlos nodded, a flicker of worry passing through him. Had he done something wrong? Was the CEO having second thoughts? They stepped away from the piano while Sophia gathered her things. I wanted to thank you, Thornton said in a low voice. I haven't seen her this engaged since before the accident. She's very talented, Carlos replied. It's a privilege to work with her. Thornton hesitated, then asked, Do you think she can really do this? Perform in front of hundreds of people in her condition? Carlos considered the question carefully. I believe she can. But more importantly, I think she needs to try. This isn't just about music, it's about reclaiming a part of herself. Thornton nodded slowly. I've spent 3 years trying to protect her from everything, watching her withdraw further into silence. Maybe that was the wrong approach. Sometimes the things that hurt us most are also the things that can heal us, Carlos said. My daughter taught me that. Your daughter, Thornton repeated. You mentioned she passed away. May I ask what happened? Leukemia, Carlos replied, the word still difficult to say even after 5 years. She was 11. I'm sorry, Thornton said, and Carlos could tell he meant it. Was she musical like you? Carlos smiled at the memory. She loved to sing, had the voice of an angel. Even in the hospital, she would sing for the other kids. Said it made them feel better. Something shifted in Thornton's expression. The children's hospital? The same one our gala is supporting? Carlos nodded. The very same. They did everything they could for Angela. Thornton was quiet for a moment. Perhaps there are no coincidences, Mr. Mendez. Before Carlos could respond, Sophia joined them, looking between the two men curiously. Just getting to know your teacher better, Thornton explained. Let's head home, Sophia. It's getting late. As they walked toward the elevator, Sophia turned and gave Carlos a small wave goodbye. There was something different in her eyes now, a spark that hadn't been there before. It reminded Carlos painfully of his daughter in those rare good days between treatments, when hope would briefly overpower fear. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Carlos would finish his cleaning duties, then meet Sophia and her father in the atrium for 2 hours of practice. Sometimes Thornton would bring work with him, typing quietly on his laptop while they rehearsed. Other times he would simply listen, occasionally closing his eyes as if the music transported him somewhere else. By the end of the first week, word had spread among the night staff. Pete, the security guard, would time his rounds to coincide with their practice. Elena from the night cleaning crew would pause with her cart outside the atrium. Even a few executives working late would find reasons to pass by and listen. No one mentioned these impromptu audiences to Sophia directly, but Carlos could tell she had noticed. At first, it made her nervous, her playing becoming more hesitant whenever she spotted someone watching. But gradually, she grew more comfortable with the small crowds. One evening, about halfway through their rehearsal period, Thornton was called away for an emergency conference call. He hesitated before leaving them alone. I trust you'll continue productively? He asked. Of course, sir, Carlos assured him. After Thornton left, Sophia seemed to relax a little. She played with more freedom, taking more risks with her interpretation. When they took a break, she wrote in her notebook, He tries so hard. Always watching, always worried, Carlos nodded. That's what parents do. We worry, she wrote again. After Mom died, he changed. Became so protective, like he was afraid to lose me too. Loss changes people, Carlos said. Makes you realize how fragile everything is. Sophia thought for a moment, then wrote, Did it change you? Carlos hadn't expected such a direct question. He sat down on the piano bench and considered his answer carefully. Yes, he finally said. After Angela died, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything that mattered and left just the shell. I stopped teaching, stopped playing. I took this job because it required almost nothing of me emotionally. Just clean floors, empty trash, stay invisible. Sophia watched him intently as he spoke. For a long time, I thought that was all I had left in me. Carlos continued. Then one day, Pete's grandson was waiting in the lobby for him. Little boy, maybe 7 years old. He was sitting at this very piano, just randomly pressing keys. I showed him how to play a simple tune. The way his face lit up when he got it right. Carlos smiled at the memory. That was the first time in 2 years that I felt something besides grief. Sophia wrote, "And now you're teaching again." "I guess I am," Carlos realized. "Thank you for that gift." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. Then Sophia wrote something else. "I haven't spoken since the accident. Not because I can't," Carlos nodded. He had suspected as much, though he would never have asked. "Because I was there," she continued writing. "In the car, I saw everything. The last thing Mom said was my name. Sometimes I think if I speak, if I let that sound out, she'll really be gone." Carlos felt a lump in his throat. He understood now the silence wasn't just grief. It was a way of preserving the last moment she had shared with her mother. "Your mother will never be gone as long as you remember her," he said gently. "And now, you're bringing her music back to life. That's another way of keeping her with you." Sophia wiped away a tear and nodded. Then she turned back to the piano and began to play again. This time, the music flowed from her with an emotional depth that hadn't been there before. It was as if a wall had come down, allowing her true feelings to pour through her fingertips into the keys. Carlos sat quietly, letting her play uninterrupted. Sometimes he was beginning to realize the best teaching happened when he wasn't teaching at all. The second week of rehearsals brought new challenges. As the gala drew closer, Sophia's anxiety began to increase. During Monday's session, she made mistakes in passages she had previously mastered. Her frustration was visible in the tight set of her shoulders and the way she would close her eyes when she hit a wrong note. "Let's take a break," Carlos suggested after a particularly difficult run-through. Sophia shook her head stubbornly and started the piece again, only to falter at the same challenging section. "Sophia," Carlos said gently, "pushing harder won't help right now. Let's step back for a few minutes." She sighed and reluctantly moved away from the piano. Thornton, who had been working nearby, looked up with concern. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Just a little stuck," Carlos explained. "Perfectly normal at this stage," Sophia wrote in her notebook. "I'm going to mess up in front of everyone." "You might," Carlos agreed, surprising both Sophia and her father. "Even professional musicians make mistakes during performances." "That's not very encouraging," Thornton remarked with a frown. "Actually, it is," Carlos replied. "Because the truth is, most people won't even notice a small mistake. And if they do, they'll forget it seconds later if you keep playing with confidence." Sophia didn't look convinced. She wrote, "But what if I freeze completely?" Carlos thought for a moment. Would it help to have a test run? A small audience before the big night? Sophia looked uncertain but interested in the idea. "We could invite a few people," Carlos continued. "Pete, Elena, maybe some of the other night staff who've been listening from the hallway. Just a short, informal performance to get used to playing for others." Sophia glanced at her father, who nodded thoughtfully. "That's not a bad idea. We could do it Thursday evening. I'll arrange for some refreshments." Sophia wrote, 2 days from now? That's so soon." "Exactly," Carlos said. "Not enough time to worry about it too much, and a small, friendly audience is the perfect way to prepare for the gala." After some hesitation, Sophia agreed. They spent the rest of the session working through the trouble spots in her performance, breaking down difficult passages into smaller, more manageable sections. By the end of the evening, she was playing better, though still not as confidently as before. As they packed up, Thornton approached Carlos. "A word, please?" They stepped aside while Sophia gathered her music. "Do you really think this mini-concert is a good idea?" Thornton asked in a low voice. "She seems so fragile right now." "She's stronger than you think," Carlos replied. "And yes, I believe this will help. Stage fright feeds on the unknown. Once she experiences playing for a small group and survives it, the gala will feel less intimidating." Thornton studied him for a moment. "You seem very certain." "I've taught many students through their first performances," Carlos said. "Trust me on this." Something in his tone must have convinced the CEO because Thornton nodded. "Very well. I'll have my assistant make the arrangements tomorrow." When Thursday evening arrived, Carlos was surprised to find the atrium transformed. Someone, presumably Thornton's staff, had arranged chairs in a semicircle around the piano. A small table with refreshments stood nearby. Soft lighting created an intimate concert-like atmosphere. Sophia was already there, looking pale but determined in a simple blue dress. She showed Carlos her notebook. "I feel sick. My hands won't stop shaking." "Deep breaths," he advised her. "Remember, these people are all on your side. They want you to succeed." People began to filter in, about 15 in all. Pete the security guard, Elena and 2 other members of the night cleaning crew, a handful of executives who regularly worked late, and Linda from events, who had been skeptical about Sophia's ability to perform. Thornton welcomed them and thanked them for coming to this special preview. As Sophia took her place at the piano, Carlos gave her an encouraging nod. "Just like we practiced, the music knows the way." She placed her trembling hands on the keys. For a terrifying moment, she didn't move, and Carlos wondered if she had frozen completely. Then slowly she began to play. The first notes were hesitant, but as the familiar melody took shape, Sophia seemed to forget her audience. Her body relaxed, her fingers finding their confidence. By the time she reached the middle section, the part she had arranged herself, she was playing with the same emotional depth Carlos had witnessed during their practices. The small audience sat in rapt attention. Even Linda looked impressed. Thornton stood at the back, his usual composed expression softened with pride and something like wonder. When Sophia finished, there was a moment of silence, as if no one wanted to break the spell her music had cast. Then the applause began, enthusiastic and genuine. Pete let out an appreciative whistle. Elena wiped away a tear. Sophia's face flushed with pleasure as she stood to acknowledge the applause. Carlos caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up. She had done it, played through her nerves and connected with her audience. The impromptu reception afterward was lively. Several people approached Sophia to compliment her playing. She responded with nods and smiles, writing brief notes of thanks in her notebook. Linda came over to where Carlos was standing. "I have to admit I was wrong," she said. "She's remarkable, and you've done an amazing job preparing her." "Sophia did the hard work," Carlos replied. "I just helped her remember what she already knew." Later, as the small crowd dispersed, Thornton approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to Carlos. "A toast," he said. "To a successful rehearsal." They clinked glasses. Sophia joined them, her eyes bright with excitement. She wrote, "It felt good. Like before, you were wonderful," her father told her. "Your mother would be so proud." Sophia's smile faltered a bit at the mention of her mother, but she nodded in agreement. "1 week until the gala," Thornton said. "Do you feel ready?" Sophia hesitated, then wrote, "Getting there. Still nervous about the big crowd?" "That's natural," Carlos assured her. "But after tonight, you know you can do it." The next few practice sessions showed a marked improvement. Sophia played with growing confidence, working through difficult passages with determination rather than frustration. She even began to experiment more with dynamics and tempo, making the piece truly her own. On Monday evening, they had an unexpected visitor. As they were working on the final section of the piece, Dr. Reynolds, the director of the Children's Hospital, stopped by with Thornton's assistant. "Hope you don't mind the interruption," she said. "I was meeting with Mr. Thornton about the gala details, and he mentioned his daughter's performance. I couldn't resist coming down to listen for a moment." Sophia looked nervous at this addition to their usual audience, but she nodded politely. "Please, continue," Dr. Reynolds said, taking a seat near Thornton. "Pretend I'm not even here." After a reassuring glance from Carlos, Sophia began playing again. Dr. Reynolds listened intently, her expression softening as the music filled the atrium. When Sophia finished, the doctor applauded warmly. "That was beautiful," she said. "Truly moving." Thornton introduced them properly. "Dr. Reynolds has been overseeing the new rehabilitation wing that the gala is funding. The Maria Thornton Memorial Wing," Dr. Reynolds added. "It's going to make such a difference for our young patients. Music therapy will be a key component, actually." Sophia looked interested. She wrote in her notebook, "Music therapy?" "Yes," Dr. Reynolds explained. "Using music to help children cope with pain, express emotions, and support their recovery. It's remarkable what music can do for healing, both physical and emotional." Sophia wrote again, "I'd like to know more about that. Perhaps you could visit the hospital sometime," Dr. Reynolds suggested. See our current music therapy program in action. We have a wonderful therapist who works miracles with the kids. Sophia looked at her father, who nodded. We could arrange that.
After the gala, perhaps. As Dr. Reynolds prepared to leave, she turned to Sophia.
Your performance will mean a lot to our patients. Many of them will be at the gala with their families. They're excited to hear you play. After she left, Sophia sat quietly at the piano, not playing, just thinking. Finally, she wrote something and showed it to Carlos and her father. Now I have another reason to do this right. You will, Carlos assured her. But remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about sharing something meaningful. The night before the gala, they held their final rehearsal. Sophia played the piece from beginning to end without a single mistake. Her interpretation had evolved over the 2 weeks of practice, becoming more nuanced and personal. When she finished, Carlos found himself blinking back tears. That was perfect, he said. You're ready. Thornton, who had been unusually quiet all evening, cleared his throat. Mr. Mendez, Carlos, I want to thank you for everything you've done. It was my pleasure, Carlos replied sincerely. Your daughter is an exceptional musician. It's more than that, Thornton said. These past 2 weeks, I've seen glimpses of the Sophia I used to know. Before the accident, Sophia was watching them, her expression unreadable. I realize now, Thornton continued, that I've been so focused on protecting her that I've been holding her back, keeping her in that same moment of tragedy instead of helping her move forward. He turned to his daughter. I'm sorry, Sophia. I thought I was doing what was best for you. Sophia's eyes welled with tears. She wrote quickly in her notebook and showed it to her father. I know. I love you. Thornton pulled her into a hug, something Carlos had never seen him do before. When they separated, the CEO looked embarrassed by this display of emotion. Well, he said, straightening his tie, we should all get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. As they prepared to leave, Sophia approached Carlos with her notebook. She had written a longer message than usual. Thank you for seeing the music that was still inside me when everyone else only saw silence. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already given me back something I thought was lost forever. Carlos read it and smiled. That goes both ways, you know. You've reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. Sophia hesitated, then gave him a quick, shy hug before hurrying to join her father at the elevator. Carlos stood alone in the atrium for a long moment after they left. The building was quiet now, with only the distant hum of the ventilation system breaking the silence. He walked over to the piano and gently pressed one key, listening to the note resonate and fade. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But something important had already happened here, something that couldn't be measured by applause or judged by critics. 3 broken people had helped each other find pieces of themselves that had been lost to grief. As Carlos gathered his things to leave, he found himself humming a tune, one of Angela's favorites. For the first time in years, the melody brought a smile rather than pain. Tomorrow, Sophia would play for hundreds of people at the gala. But tonight, in his own way, Carlos had begun to play again too. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers and elegant decorations. Round tables covered in crisp white linens filled the space, each centered with arrangements of blue and silver flowers. A stage had been set up at the front of the room with a magnificent grand piano as its centerpiece. Carlos felt distinctly out of place as he entered through the service entrance. Despite Thornton's insistence that he attend the gala as a guest, Carlos had declined. He wasn't comfortable mingling with the city's elite in their formal attire. Instead, he'd asked if he could watch Sophia's performance from backstage, then slip away afterward. The backstage area buzzed with activity, sound technicians checking equipment, hotel staff arranging last-minute details, and event coordinators speaking urgently into headsets. Carlos found a quiet corner where he could wait without being in the way. He had dressed in his best clothes, clean black pants and a white button-down shirt that his wife had ironed carefully that morning. It wasn't fancy, but it was respectful. From his position, Carlos could peek through a gap in the curtains. The ballroom was filling with guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. He spotted several children among them, patients from the hospital, he guessed, here with their families to see the unveiling of the new wing named after Maria Thornton. There you are. Carlos turned to find Thornton approaching. The CEO looked distinguished in his tuxedo, though the tight line of his mouth betrayed his nervousness. Sophia's been asking for you, Thornton said. She's in the small preparation room down the hall. Carlos followed him to a door marked Performers. Inside, Sophia sat alone, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress. Her hair had been arranged in a stylish updo, and she wore a silver necklace that caught the light. She looked beautiful but terrified, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. When she saw Carlos, relief washed over her face. She grabbed her notebook and wrote quickly, "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Carlos said calmly, taking a seat beside her. "Remember our rehearsals? Remember Thursday's performance?" She wrote again, "This is different.
So many people.
What if I forget the music? What if my hands freeze?" "Look at me," Carlos said gently. Sophia raised her eyes to meet his. "The music is inside you. It's been there all along, even when you couldn't play. Your mother's melody, your own arrangement, they're part of you now. Your hands remember." Thornton watched this exchange silently. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to give you this after the performance," he said to Sophia. "But I think now might be better." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a small piano charm. It was your mother's. She wore it for every performance from the time she was a student. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she took the bracelet and slipped it onto her wrist. She touched the small piano charm with her fingertip, then wrote, "She's with me tonight." "She always is," Thornton said, his voice rough with emotion. A staff member appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Miss Thornton." Sophia took a deep breath and stood up. Carlos and Thornton walked with her to the edge of the stage. Through the curtain, they could hear Linda from events introducing the evening's program. "Tonight is about hope," Linda was saying. "The Maria Thornton Memorial Wing will provide state-of-the-art rehabilitation services to children when they need it most. And now, to honor her mother's memory, Sophia Thornton will perform a very special piece." Thornton squeezed his daughter's hand one last time. "I'm so proud of you," Carlos simply nodded at her. "You've got this." Sophia walked onto the stage alone, the spotlight following her to the piano. The audience applauded politely as she took her seat and adjusted the bench. From backstage, Carlos could see her take a deep breath, close her eyes briefly, and then place her hands on the keys. The first notes filled the ballroom, gentle, hesitant, like the beginning of a question. Then the melody took shape, Maria Thornton's original composition flowing from her daughter's fingers. The audience fell completely silent, captivated. As Sophia played, Carlos watched her shoulders relax, her body swaying slightly with the music. When she reached the middle section, the part she had arranged herself, the music shifted, becoming more complex and personal. It was as if she were telling her own story now, a conversation with her mother's melody. Beside Carlos, Thornton stood motionless, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "I had no idea," he whispered. No idea she felt so much. The piece built toward its climax, Sophia's hands moving confidently across the keys. The final section was both a resolution and a new beginning, the notes both honoring what had been lost and celebrating what remained. As the last chord faded into silence, the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. Then the applause began, tentative at first, then building to thunderous appreciation. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears from their eyes. Sophia stood and gave a small bow, her face flushed with emotion. As the applause continued, something unexpected happened. Sophia stepped forward to the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. Carlos felt Thornton tense beside him. Sophia touched the microphone lightly as if testing it was real. Then she leaned forward and spoke, her voice scratchy from disuse but clear enough to be heard throughout the ballroom. "Thank you," she said, just those two simple words. The audience's applause redoubled. Thornton gasped beside Carlos, his hand clutching Carlos's arm for support. "She spoke," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "After 3 years?" Sophia returned to the piano and gestured toward the side of the stage, beckoning to her father. Thornton looked startled, then moved onto the stage to join his daughter. She whispered something to him and he nodded, his expression a mixture of joy and disbelief. Turning back to the microphone, Thornton addressed the crowd. "My daughter would like to dedicate this performance to her mother's memory, to the children who will benefit from the new hospital wing," and his voice caught slightly, "to Carlos Mendez, who helped her find her music again." Carlos felt his face grow hot as many heads turned, searching the ballroom for this unknown person. He stepped further back into the shadows of the backstage area. After Thornton and Sophia left the stage to continued applause, they found Carlos trying to slip away toward the service exit. "Where are you going?" Thornton asked. "The night is just beginning." "I don't belong out there," Carlos said, gesturing toward the ballroom. "I just came to see Sophia play." "You belong with us tonight," Thornton said firmly. "Without you, none of this would have happened." Sophia nodded in agreement. With visible effort, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper but unmistakable. "Please stay." How could he refuse that? Carlos allowed them to lead him into the ballroom, feeling self-conscious in his simple clothes among the formal attire of the other guests. Dr. Reynolds approached them immediately, her face alight with excitement. "Sophia, that was extraordinary. And I just heard, you're speaking again?" Sophia nodded, smiling shyly. "The music therapist position I mentioned," Dr. Reynolds continued. "We're still looking for the right person, someone who understands both music and healing." She glanced meaningfully at Carlos, then back to Sophia. "Perhaps you two might be interested in visiting the hospital more regularly? We could use volunteers while we search." Before either could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers, hospital, board members, Thornton's business associates, and several families with children from the hospital. One little girl in a wheelchair rolled up to Sophia. "I'm learning piano too," she said, "but I'm not as good as you yet." Sophia knelt down to the child's level. "You will be," she whispered, her voice gaining a little strength with each use. "Just practice." Throughout the evening, Sophia spoke sparingly, as if each word required careful consideration. But she was speaking, short phrases, simple responses, her voice growing slightly stronger each time. As the night wore on, Carlos found himself unexpectedly at ease. Several parents of hospital patients sought him out after learning of his role in Sophia's performance. They shared stories of their own children's journeys, the struggles and the triumphs, the healing power of music in their lives. Near the end of the evening, Thornton approached with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Carlos. "I've been thinking," Thornton said. "The foundation that supports the hospital is looking for someone to oversee their arts programs. It would involve coordinating music therapy, organizing performances, teaching occasionally. The salary is substantial." Carlos looked at him in surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "Consider it creating a position for the right person," Thornton replied. "You've reminded me how powerful music can be as a healing force. Not just for Sophia, but for all those children." Before Carlos could respond, Sophia joined them. She had been speaking with Dr. Reynolds but seemed eager to share something. "I want to volunteer," she said carefully, each word deliberate but clear. "At the hospital, with the music program." Thornton looked from his daughter to Carlos, then smiled. "It seems we're moving in a new direction as a family." Later that night, as the gala wound down, Carlos found a quiet moment alone with Sophia. "Your playing was beautiful," he told her. "Your mother would be so proud." "Thank you," Sophia said softly, "for everything." She hesitated, then added, "Angela would be proud of you too." Carlos felt tears prick his eyes at the mention of his daughter's name. "Yes," he agreed. "I think she would." As Carlos left the Grand Plaza that night, walking through the quiet streets toward the bus stop, he felt lighter somehow. The weight of grief he had carried for 5 years hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, become more bearable. In helping Sophia find her voice again, both through music and through words, he had somehow found his own path forward. Tomorrow he would still put on his janitor's uniform and clean the floors of Westfield Tower, but soon, very soon, he would be teaching again, making music again, living again. And somewhere, he was certain, Angela was smiling,